This year, 2019, I have challenged myself not to buy any items of clothing. Instead, I'm attempting to make anything that I need or want. This isn't about environmentalism or saving money or escaping the fast fashion trap, though those are all excellent bonuses. The goal is really to learn. For example, my only good pair of jeans has just gotten a hole in the knee. Ordinarily, this is when I would start jean shopping for a new pair. However, this challenge prevents me from taking the easy way out. And since my last pair of jeans didn't turn out very well, or very comfortable, I'm going to have to make a much more considered attempt when pants wearing season comes back around. Today, however, it is 95 degrees outside, and I do not need a pair of pants, but some skirts would be nice.
On July 1st, linen was 60% off at Joann's, and I stocked up big time. Today I'm going to make 3 skirts. All will follow roughly the same pattern, but I will add slight variations with the closure method, style of pleats, and placement of belt loops. The mustard yellow and teal are both 50% linen and 50% rayon, and the pink is 100% linen. All are lightweight, but still have the characteristic stiffness of linen. The goal is to come up with a fairly universal pattern that I can easily remake for future projects. I thought I had my universal pattern with the gray skirt I made for the capsule wardrobe, but when I tried to remake it with pleats, I realized that the fabric did not pleat well across the bias, which I probably should have known, but here we are. So for the future, I will use my flared skirt pattern for gathered skirts when I want to minimize the gathered bulk at the waist, but for any pleated skirt, I will use straight rectangular skirt patterns. I also was trying to follow the more classical vintage style for skirts and made them come down to T-length. However, I don't find this to be a very flattering length for me, so I've decided to make the skirts reach just to the base of the knee. Because although vintage is the general direction I want my style to head in, I am not committed to any kind of historical accuracy. I want to blend history with modernity in a way that I find comfortable and aesthetically pleasing. That is the great thing about the time we live in, and one of the chief benefits of making your own clothes. You can wear whatever you darn well please. We have the luxury of drawing from all of fashion history, cherry-picking what we like and discarding the rest. To make the skirts, I started by evening out the cut edges from the store. I do this with linen by pulling a thread, enough to slightly raise it, make it stand out. Then I cut along this thread, creating a perfectly straight, on-grain edge. I used the same method to measure out and cut 2 rectangles for the main front and backs of each skirt. The rectangles measure 40 inches wide by 26 inches long. Because of the natural thickness of linen, I think this is enough fullness for the skirts. If I was using a lighter weight cotton, for instance, I would probably make the skirts fuller, perhaps bumping the width to 55 inches. Next, I need to measure out the waistbands. I like narrow waistbands, but it needs to be wide enough to easily accommodate a belt. I think 1 1/4 inches of finished width will be perfect. So double that to get the front and back, plus a 1/2 inch for each seam allowance, and you come to 3 1/2 inches wide. For the length, I usually make the mistake of making the waistband to my exact waist measurements. Since these are summer skirts and comfort is the priority, I want to make them just slightly looser than that. I think I will take my waist measurement, which fluctuates between 27 and 28 inches, and bump it to a 29-inch finished measurement, plus 1 inch for the overlap, plus a 1/2 inch for each seam allowance, and I'll be cutting the waistbands to 31 inches in length. For the pink skirt, I'm adding an extra inch because I want 2 inches of overlap. I will also need to cut plackets for the fly of the pink and teal skirts. On my last skirt, I made the fly 8 inches deep, but that felt like too much. So for these skirts, I will plan on the fly being 6 inches deep, which doubles for the 2 halves, plus a 1/2 inch for each seam allowance, which brings us to 13 inches long for the placket. As for the width, I want 1 inch in the front, 1 inch in the back, and a 1/2 inch for each seam allowance, so it will be 3 inches wide. And one more piece, the very most important modern update, pockets. I'm trying out a new pocket pattern, one that will hopefully be much deeper than the pocket pattern I've been using till now. I need to cut 4 for each skirt. Alright, with everything measured and cut out, I'm ready to start sewing. Hopefully these calculations will make it easier for you to formulate your own skirt pattern if you wish to do so. First, I will need to get the pockets in. I've been experimenting with ways to finish pockets because serging the edges always seems messy to me, and I definitely don't want to line these skirts. But I think I've come up with a good method for using French seams on pockets. I have to pin the pocket to the skirt side and sew it 1/4 inch from the edge. Then turn, press, and stitch again, this time 3/8 of an inch from the edge. If you open it up, the edge is now nicely finished. To go around the pocket, I pin the skirt pieces wrong sides together and also sew 1/4 inch from the edge, going up the side of the skirt, then tracing along the outside of the pocket. Clip around the curved edges, then turn the whole skirt wrong side out and press, pinning the seam again. Sew it 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and you now have pockets with completely finished edges. You will also need to sew the side of the skirt together above and below the pocket opening, which I've measured to 3 inches from the top of the pocket and 3 inches from the bottom. leaving a 6-inch opening in the center. Waha, ready to start the front closures. The yellow skirt will button all the way up, so I simply measure to the middle of the front and cut it open. I will fold down a 1-inch hem for both sides. And this one is ready. The pink and teal skirts are a little more complex. I find the middle of the front and then measure a 1/2 inch away from the middle, so that when the placket folds down it will still end up centered. Only cut down 6.5 inches. Then I line this opening up with my placket and sew a 1/4 inch from the edge, narrowing out the edge of the skirt when I get to the center of the split. Open and iron this edge, then fold over a 1/2 inch on the other side of the placket. Fold that edge over to meet the seam, and then either machine stitch or hand sew it in place. And the flies are now finished and the skirts ready to be attached to the waistbands. I got experimental with the pleats. I had a general idea of what I wanted for each skirt, but no method or strategy. It involved a lot of pinning and unpinning. For the yellow skirt, I used a few big box pleats. For the pink skirt, I did a row of small, about 1-inch pleats, all facing the same direction all the way around the skirt. And for the teal skirt, I used slightly larger pleats, all facing the front. I wanted the yellow skirt to look similar to modern skirts I see online. For the pink skirt, I was going for the very feminine, romantic look. And for the teal skirt, I wanted something more basic and universal. So I wanted bigger, less refined looking pleats, and intentionally did not iron them. Once they were sewn to the waistband, I realized that I had forgotten my belt loops. I wanted the belt loops to be a 1/2 inch wide, so I cut a strip of each linen to be 1.5 inches wide, and sewed it into a tube with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Turned the tube right side out and cut it into generous lengths. I can trim off the excess later. I decided on the placements for each belt loop, then seam ripped a small section of the skirt at each one, inserting the belt loop and sewing it together again. Now the waistbands can be finished. Iron down a 1/2 inch across the top edge, then turn in the 1/2 inch I left as excess from the skirt fronts. I stitched this down by hand, using an invisible slip stitch. Now there are only finishing details left. I ironed a 1/2 inch, then 2 full inches up for the hem. I like wide, weighty hems. I tacked down the top of the belt loops inside the waistband by hand. Then I was left with the final closures. For the yellow skirt, I used wooden buttons all the way down the front. I placed them, then stitched them, then marked out the corresponding buttonhole placements with a water-soluble marker. For the teal skirt, I chose one metal shank button from my collection and sewed it, plus the buttonhole at the front waistband. Inside the fly, I sewed 2 metal snaps. I did the same for the pink skirt, except that the extra inch I left on the waistband gave me room for 2 buttons. I chose 2 very impractical ones that had been in my collection since 2012. The teacup and the teapot, making this skirt the most aggressively feminine item currently in my closet. The buttons had to have weird, uneven buttonholes, so there is no going back on that choice. A final ironing is in order and they are complete. I used 1.5 yards of fabric for each skirt, 54 inches wide. The linen was on sale 60% off, so this ended up being a very low-cost project. The yellow linen cost $7.79, plus about $5 for the wooden buttons. The teal linen was the same price as the yellow, but I bought a whole lot more, as I plan on making a jumpsuit from the same fabric. The pink linen was a higher quality 100% linen, so it ended up being slightly more expensive, $13.19. In terms of time, I didn't keep track of the hours, but it took me 3 days to complete the 3 skirts. So, averaging a day plus $12 per skirt, for perfect colors, fit, style, and length, I think this project was a worthwhile investment into my wardrobe, which, as some of you know, I'm working on fleshing out with all of the basics. I'm planning on repeating a challenge I did last year, which was to only wear items I've sewn myself for the entire month of October. Last year, I did this challenge on a whim, but it was a great learning experience, and I'm determined to do it better this year. But part of that means stocking up on basics for both warm and cold weather, as I will certainly experience both in that month. So, I thank you for joining me. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I plan on being back with a world building video next week and another sewing video the week after that.